We can never truly know what's going on inside someone else's mind, and yet that might be just exactly what they need to unburden themselves. So why not offer an ear? Why not listen? I'm Richard Sefton, and this is my podcast, State of Mind, with me, Richard Sefton. Today I'm joined by writer and historian Aiden Enright. Aiden has battled with anxiety and depression throughout his life and has agreed to tell me all about it in this episode. I'd like to look back over your life from childhood to present day, and at the end you can let everyone know where they can read all about it in greater detail. So first off, Aiden, how are you?
I'm good, Richard, thanks, and thanks for having me on your podcast. I really enjoy it.
It's really, really lovely to have you here, and it's nice to hear that gorgeous accent.
Thanks.
Whereabouts are you in the world?
I live in Saltaire, which is just outside Bradford in West Yorkshire.
And that's the natural accent of there, isn't it? Whereabouts are you from?
Yeah. I am from a place called Elphin, which is a small town in a county called Roscommon, which is in the Republic of Ireland, in the western part of the Republic of Ireland.
Beautiful. I mean, just you saying the western part of Ireland could be anything, but I'm thinking beautiful. It sounds beautiful.
Well, the thing is, when people in Britain, especially, they say the south of Ireland, but I'm very resistant to that because I'm definitely from the west of Ireland.
Okay.
So they say the south of Ireland, and they mean the Republic of Ireland.
They mean They
call it the south, but like obviously Ireland has got a south and an east and a west.
Absolutely.
Like any other country.
Absolutely.
Anyway, there you go.
So would you class the north of the Republic the south of Northern Ireland? if you know what I
mean. Yes, I guess so. Yeah, the southwest. Yeah. Because yes, I would. Yes, yeah. Ireland is like any other country, like England. You know, you've got different regions and different parts of it that people are, you know, their own identities and strong attachments to within the sort of bigger parts of it.
I've not seen enough of Ireland. I've been to Ireland, but I've only been to the Republic of Ireland. I've never been to Northern Ireland. I've never. Have I? No, I haven't.
Whereabouts in the south of Ireland have you been?
I've been to Cork
right.
And Dublin, but I think I was about 8 or 9 when I went to Dublin, so I can't remember it.
Yeah. Well, where I'm from in the west of Ireland is very different to Dublin. Very.
It's gorgeous, like Atlantic coastline, is it?
Yeah. Well, I'm sort of where I'm from is kind of on the border between the west and the Midlands. So I'm not. It's an inland county. It doesn't have any coastline. But
I will look it up at the end of this recording and have a look through the images and stuff and make myself jealous, or maybe book a trip over. Why not?
Why not? Yeah.
So can we start there then? Can we start in childhood?
Sure. Yeah. So as I say, I grew up in a place called Elphin, or just outside Elphin. So it was, you know, a farming community. A 70-acre farm, which was kind of a middling-sized farm. So, you know, there was lots of really small holdings of, you know, sort of 20 acres or 30 acres. But anyway, we grew up on a farm. I was the youngest of 9 children.
9 children?
Yes, yeah. So, a very typically... So I was born in 1979. Mm-hmm. And I guess my generation were the last generation of big families in Ireland. People stopped then having so many children sort of in the 80s and 90s, sort of, well, you know, generally speaking. You know, the tradition was to have big families. Not everybody did, but a lot of people did. So it wasn't unusual for me to have friends who had 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 sometimes children in their family, or siblings, you know, in their families.
Yeah.
So grew up on a farm. As I say, I was the youngest of 9, and it was, you know, we lived in a nice place. It was very rural. We all had to chip in and work on the farm from a young age. I was milking cows with my dad before I was going to school when I was 9 or 10.
Wow.
So, you know, it was, you know, in one sense we didn't know any different. So it was like you had nothing really to compare it to, I guess. But on the other hand, you kind of knew that some of my friends in school, or most of my friends in school, weren't doing that kind of thing. So, I was sort of aware from a young age that we were expected to do a lot. But that
Was it a farming community, or?
It was, yeah, predominantly, yes, yeah.
But most of your friends weren't helping their dads, but they were on farms.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly,
okay.
yeah. No, they would have been helping out, at the weekends and stuff like that, and doing small little bits and bobs with their dads on the farm, but not sort of full on, hands on, sort of to that extent.
Okay.
And I guess throw into the mix as well the fact that when I was the next brother up from me, Damien, he left home when he was 17, and I was 9 when he left. So I was like the next in line, if you like, to sort of take over from.
So there was a big gap between the next one up and you.
Well, so Damien was a twin. It was Damien and Siobhan, the twins, and then in between them and me was my sister Sinead and my sister Claire.
Okay.
So there was a big gap between him and me. And it was sort of a traditional kind of setup. The boys.
So the next male up, sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, mostly the boys did the work on the outside. Now, that's not to say that the girls didn't work outside as well. They did, but mostly it was the boys who sort of were outside with their dad on the farm.
Yeah.
So so it was. I sort of took over a lot, not all of the jobs that Damien would have done. Once he left, so. You can sort of add that into the mix of, being outside with my dad was sort of that sort of my role, and that sort of was bumped up, if you like, by the fact that Damien left. Lots of hard work. Could be difficult at times. My dad was quite old at that stage, relatively speaking, I guess. Like I was 9 or 10, and he was in his early 50s. And at that stage, he just had a hip operation, and he was a bit spent, really. He just worked hard all his life, and he was worn out,
Yeah.
And my mum was sort of in a similar sort of. She'd had 9 kids, well, actually 10. Their first child died, and then they went on to have 9 more. So, they had a hard life. They really had a tough, hard life, and they worked really, really hard. And they we never wanted for anything. We were I guess we were sort of typically sort of rural working class. There wasn't any surplus money floating about, but we were never wanted for anything as such either. So we were. I don't know. It's hard to. It's all relative, isn't it? Like we weren't poor, but there wasn't any extra money floating about.
Yeah.
It was just, and it was a subsistence type farming as well. Like we had a vegetable garden, and we grew our own potatoes and cabbage and carrots and parsnips and lettuce and scallions and you name it. And that was part of the work on the farm as well every year. Out in the garden with my dad and digging and picking weeds and all that kind of stuff, and it was hard physical work, but you got used to it. You just got on with it.
So as well as farming for a business, you farmed for yourselves as well?
Yes, yeah. I guess that's probably it. Yeah. It was a business in the sense, that my dad. We had a dairy farm until I was about 10 or 11, and then we switched to what they call dry stock. So that's cows and calves. Rearing the calves on the farm with the cows. They either call it dry stock or a suckling herd. So.
And so is that for meat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So you would rear the calves and you would sell them off, either at sort of 9 or 10 months old, or you would keep them until they were like a year and a half old and then sell them off for meat. Yeah. It was, there was always enough money to cover the bills and that, and to get by, but there was no such thing as going out for meals or
extravagant holidays.
Holidays didn't exist. Going, the big deal was going to Boyle, which is like a local town, to go shopping, to buy some clothes maybe.
Boyle.
Boyle.
My local town's Mould. So similar.
Yeah. Well, it's Boyle. It's not Boil.
Mine's MOLD.
People from Boyle would be highly offended if I said it was Boil. But anyway, actually, just as an aside, do you know Chris O'Dowd? the actor. That's where he's from.
Oh, really? IT Crowd, is that? I'm thinking the right person. Yeah.
That's where he's from. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I played football against him when I was under 12 and under 14.
You are joking.
I swear to God, he would. No, I'm not claiming to know him or anything. That's
Oh, let's just pretend that you do. Oh, he's your best friend.
yeah. But I remember going to a football match in under 14, and I was actually one of the tallest boys on the team at the time. But I was like 5'5" or 5'6" or something. And Chris was the same height that he is now when he was 14. So I'm walking out onto this pitch, and this absolute monster, and I had to mark him. But he was gentle. He was a gentle giant. He was a lovely fella. Even then, you could tell he was a bit of a laugh. He didn't take it too seriously. He wasn't, throwing his weight around. He certainly could have done.
Well, I often found that about the biggest kids in school myself. The biggest kids in school were normally they weren't the bully boys. They weren't the ones, like you say, throwing their weight around.
Not always. No, that's true, I think. But anyway, that's an aside. Yeah, so I don't know where I was. Boyle, yeah. So that was sort of, going into Boyle to do some clothes shopping or to go to the hardware store, something like that.
Okay.
Or going to the market with my dad. They were the days out.
Were you aware of the lack of extra cash? I mean, were you looking at friends and going, oh, how come they can do that, or how can they do that? Or was that the normal area sort of demographics of?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of people like us. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we were an exception. We weren't to a large degree. But there were a lot of people in the local town, sort of middle-class professional families or slightly bigger farmers who had a few more quid to spare or whatever. They would have went on holidays, either staycation somewhere in Ireland or, gone to, over to Britain or maybe to Spain or, something like that. But I would say still those kinds of families were in the minority, definitely. So in that sense we weren't that unusual, but I was aware that other families in the local area, in the countryside and also in the local town were sort of had stuff that I didn't, but it wasn't to be honest, it wasn't that big of a deal, because, it just wasn't, I guess, But so it was it was a lot of hard work, and you're expected to do a lot, which had its drawbacks. It meant you couldn't really do a lot of things, or just playing around and faffing about like a lot of my sort of contemporaries would have done. But I guess the flip side is, it gave us a sort of a strong sort of work ethic and sense of responsibility and all that kind of stuff, which is, is no bad thing either, I guess. But yeah, sort of layered on top of that then was the fact that, my parents didn't really get on, which is it's a very long and complicated story, and we could be here we could be here all day.
That's all good. That's fine.
Obviously, we don't have that much time, but basically, the bottom line is, it's like, even I don't know all the details of why it was the way it was, or basically they didn't. By the time I was a young lad, they didn't speak to each other hardly properly, and they communicated with each other mostly through their children, and they were just desperately unhappy. They were in a marriage that was broken and had been broken for some time. I don't know when things sort of started to go wrong, but I think they started to go wrong fairly quickly, and which is kind of baffling in the sense that they had as many children as they did. But that's the way it was. They didn't really speak to each other properly. They didn't treat each other like sort of normal adults, human beings would treat each other, and that made them very unhappy and made them angry and cross a lot of the time, and they would lash out, and they would hit us because of that. When I say us, I mean either myself or my siblings. So that was quite difficult for us, obviously, as children to deal with. And it wasn't just your sort of, how would I put it? It wasn't just your sort of normal run-of-the-mill, smack in the bottom, or clip around the ear kind of thing, that you would have expected, back then. Like I'm talking about, the 70s and 80s, where I don't know when corporal punishment was outlawed in Ireland. I couldn't tell you, to be honest. I honestly haven't a clue, but I think the general sense, when I was growing up, that it was okay to hit kids. That was sort of part of. No, I'm not saying that everybody's going around smacking their children, you know what I mean, or hitting them, but it was generally. Well, certainly my memory and my understanding of it was that it was accepted, if you like, that it was normal to hit children. But certainly what went on in our house was not normal even within that context. Like, so like even some of the teachers that we, in our schools and stuff, they would, like, and I'm not going to obviously name any names, but would have been quite heavy-handed in our national school. But certainly what went on in our house was not normal. Now that's not to say that it didn't go on in other houses. I know some friends of mine, certainly one, again I won't mention any names, but who went through a similar thing. So when I say what went on, there was a lot of hitting, like full-on hitting, punching, pushing, shoving, grabbing, shaking, hitting, proper slaps around the head, punches, getting hit with a brush, a fire brush or something like that, or
God.
Getting charged out with a shovel, or getting hit with a stick out in the farmyard or whatever, like a timber stick or like a plastic stick. So my dad would just fly off in a rage, basically, if something wasn't going right. It wouldn't be necessarily if you were being cheeky or being naughty or whatever. It would be when something would go wrong. Mm-hmm. So like if I was I remember like going out feeding the cows with my dad. This is when my older brother was still at home, and I would go out and help him feed the cows with a bucket of milk. And I was like 7 or 8 maybe, and you'd be trying to hold this bucket of milk, and sometimes the calf would the word is puck, so they would shove it with their head.
Okay.
And I wouldn't be able to hold it because I was 7. So it was like it would go flying in the air or tip over, and he would just completely lose the plot. And for me as a kid, it was very hard to get my head around that. Why is he getting so cross about it?
Yeah.
So it's difficult to talk about. I don't talk about it that often. I've spoken to my wife about it and counsellor and stuff like that, and a few close friends. But
so you don't talk about it often. How often do you think about it?
Gosh, it's hard to say really. Every now and then, I'm not sure what I mean by that. Maybe every couple of months, or every it depends on how I'm feeling. If I'm going through a bit of stress and anxiety, it comes back into my head, and those sort of the old feelings of fear and anxiety that surrounded being around my dad. Now, like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not saying that my dad was going around hitting us all the time.
No, there's no judgment whatsoever coming from dad. I get it. I get what you mean.
Yeah, I think it's difficult, but it's it was difficult to be around him a lot of the time. Certainly from about the age of 7, the way you start having sort of clear memories from about 6 or 7 onwards.
Yeah.
Up to 11 or 12, I guess. When I started to sort of, there was a sort of an unwritten rule, if you like, in the sense that once you got to 11 or 12 and you started to get bigger and stronger yourself, it became. There was a sense that, well, if you hit me, I might hit you back, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that certainly happened. Now, I never did that myself because I was never much of a fighter, so to speak.
Snap.
But it certainly happened with some of my other brothers, and like obviously again, that's no judgment on them or anything, but I do remember of one clear memory as a small child, where one of my brothers was basically in a full-on fight with my dad in the kitchen. Had him down the ground, thumping him basically.
How old were you then? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, I would say maybe 3 or 4.
So that would have been I'm guessing that's quite a scary memory.
It's one of those memories that sort of etched in my brain, really.
Yeah.
And my sister sort of screaming at my brother to get off him and all this kind of get off my dad, because at this stage my brother was 14 or 15 and he was an overgrown 14 or 15-year-old. He was big and strong. And obviously there was a fight about something or an argument about something, and it ended up in fisticuffs and all the rest of it. And so it sort of got to the point where my brother had gotten the better of my dad, and all of a sudden then he just stopped and just walked out of the house, and my dad ran out after him and effing him, blinding him, don't come back to this house and all this kind of stuff. And that was my brother disappeared for a couple of days and stayed with a neighbour, I think, and came back again, and he left home shortly afterwards. Yeah, so it was tough going in that sense. It was not very normal. Like, I don't know, obviously what went on in other people's houses, but
I've noticed you keep doing that kind of making excuses to stop anyone feeling sorry for you, maybe.
Yeah. Well, that's the instinct, isn't it? Because you have to sort of shake yourself down and try and get on with life, But it's like.
But you can still give yourself compassion and empathy and allow that child, that little Aiden, to allow the thought that they went through a hard time. You went through a hard time.
Yeah. Well, I've spoken to recent years with a counsellor about it, and they've said the same thing. That you need to give. You need to recognise that you had a difficult time, not be trying to sort of explain it away. And they're right. They're right. You're absolutely right. And it's like, but I guess there's always that sort of sense that there's somebody else out there who's had it worse than you and have experienced far worse things. And certainly I know friends of mine, who have awful traumas in their life, and even very close family members who have had.
Absolutely. However, what I would say to that is your worst trauma is equal to their worst trauma in terms of how we process it.
Yeah. No, look, don't get me wrong. I do agree with you, and it's just, for me, it's like I've recognised that now.
Yeah.
I do accept that, but for a long time I didn't, and I would try and sort of explain it away, to the nth degree, kind of thing.
Well, it helps. We have coping mechanisms, don't we? And I suppose to an extent it'll be part of your coping strategy.
Yes, yeah, I guess it is, yeah. So, like, I guess to get back to the story, as it were, like, that's the way it was, and it was the same for me. It was same for my brothers and my older brothers and my sisters as well. My mum would lash out, and bless her, like, she's still alive, and she had a tough life as well. My dad, they both had a tough life, and it was, the context is, I would say my feeling is that they weren't inherently bad people. They were in a very they felt trapped, I think, because they were, for their generation, you got married and you had a pile of kids, and there was no such thing as separation or divorce or anything like that. There was one family in our locality where that happened, and it was because, for extreme reasons, but like it just didn't happen, so there was no way out for them, and they were trapped in this marriage where they couldn't get on, and they didn't see eye to eye, and they were just very different people, and it just slowly sort of gradually descended into this sort of, I don't know how you describe it, this sort of war of attrition, basically, I guess. Obviously it's not funny, but they just had to find a way to live together but not live together, in the same house, and they just treated each other abominably, you know, and spoke to each other in a really negative way, and hardly spoke to each other at all in later years. And as I say, try to communicate with each other through us. You know, tell your mum, tell your mother this, or tell your father this. Or
oh, really?
Yeah. And slagging each other off in front of us, and you know, and all this kind of stuff. And
so, it's fair to say it wasn't a happy time then.
Well, it wasn't. No, a lot of this, like again, you know, and this is not me trying to, I guess, explain it away again, but like there was lots of happy times.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't just one sort of long stream of misery. Like there were a lot of the times where we rubbed along quite okay together and had a lot of fun and had a lot of good times and a lot of laughs, and you know, our house was like what you used to call a rambling house. So people used to come into our house all the time, neighbours and friends and stuff, and of course everything would be hunky-dory when anybody else would be around, and you know, the sort of pretense of everything being normal would be kept up. But you know, genuinely there were a lot of happy times, and we, you know, us as siblings when we were kids, we were quite close, and we sort of looked out for each other, and we get on very well. And you know, as I say, there were a lot of happy times, but yeah, there were a lot of unhappy times as well. Yes. Yeah, definitely. For me anyway, and you know, I can't speak for my siblings, but you know, certainly it's had a big impact on most or all of us in one way or another. You know, what happened to some of our children, definitely.
Well,
I think some of us are a bit more inclined to talk about it than others, and some of us have different memories of what happened. And the other thing, I guess, to try and explain as well, it was a very gendered upbringing. So there was certainly a sense that the girls got on better with my dad, and the boys got on better with my mum. And that was because of the dynamic, the way my mum treated the girls and the way my dad treated the boys.
Could that also had something to do with the fact that you boys spent much more time with your dad and the girls spent much more time with your mum? And
yes, yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think that was a big part of it. I think it was also part of the way that my parents sort of related to each other as well, in the sense that they communicated through us with each other in that way. So it was convenient, I guess, for my dad to communicate with mommy, you know, through the boys, or you know, through the, you know, yeah, it was sort of it's a complicated sort of mess, but I think you get the general gist.
So did you? From the age of, well, from a very young age, you worked kind of all the way up through to what sort of age then on the farm?
Well, right up until, you know, I left home. Like, I didn't leave home until I was in my early 20s. But
okay.
Most of my brothers left home when they were in their mid to late teens.
As soon as they could, sort of thing.
As soon as they could get out of there, because it was unbearable for them. You know, they couldn't get on with my dad. He couldn't get on with them. Regular fights and rows, and it was unsustainable. So yeah, and then the girls usually, so none of the boys, all of my four brothers didn't finish school, say like secondary school. I was the only one of the boys to finish secondary school, and that only happened because one of my brothers actually moved back home when I was about 14 or 15. To take over the farm eventually, because at that stage my dad was in his nearly 70 and was basically ran out of options, basically. Hadn't sort of made any sort of plan for what was going to happen, but that's a whole other story. But so the boys left home young and the girls left home soon after they finished school. So it was sort of get out of Dodge, basically, as quickly as you could. So yeah, that's the way it was, you know. But,
so you stayed until your 20s, though?
I did my leaving cert, which is like the equivalent of the A levels here in Britain. and in Northern Ireland, obviously. So, yeah, as I say, I probably wouldn't have finished school if my brother hadn't come home. But I did, but I didn't do very well. I had basically, I was actually chatting to my wife about this the other evening. I'd missed half of. So there's what they call pre-leaving and leaving cert year. So fifth year and sixth year, which is, I guess, the same as GCSE and A level, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, it's about the easiest way that I can explain it. So I missed half of the second last year of my schooling because I was staying at home on the farm doing the work and stuff like that. So I basically had a year to prepare for exams that you would normally spend 2 years still, getting your head down and preparing for and going to school and the basics of going to school.
Absolutely.
So I didn't do so well on my leaving certs. Went to institute, what they called an institute of technology, so similar to the polytechnics over here, and did a business studies course. Don't ask me why I did that. It was a complete waste of time. I had no interest in business studies, but it was like the only thing that I got enough points to get into, and proceeded to sort of make a complete hash out of that. At that stage I was drinking very heavily. I'd started drinking at quite a young age, 13, 14.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, and sort of got progressively worse, as I got older. Into my sort of mid to late teens, so I sort of crashed out of that course in the Institute of Technology, and then moved back home with my tail between my legs, which wasn't a particularly pleasant experience. And then I started working in a fitted furniture factory, which again was like, I was absolutely useless at the practical subjects at school. I was always bookish, history, English, geography, that kind of thing. That's what I was really good at, especially history and English. But I guess because of where I grew up, and you're expected to do sort of man's work kind of thing, that was sort of what I ended up doing. I did that for about 2.5 years, and then left that, and then did various other jobs, working in bars, restaurants, nightclubs, until I was 22, and then I applied to go to university as a mature student, and did that, and ended up going to university in Galway, which is like the largest city in the west of Ireland.
Yeah.
And I was actually 20. I was 23. I just turned 24 actually when I started there.
Was that something that you always dreamt of, or did it just think, what am I going to do?
I remember when I was doing my leaving cert thinking I'd love to study history at Trinity College Dublin.
Okay.
But it was completely out of my grasp.
Is that the Oxford, Cambridge?
Yes.
Equivalent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It's like Trinity is one of the oldest universities in Ireland and Britain. It's not quite as old as Oxford or Cambridge or Durham probably, but it was established in the late 16th century. So you needed in Ireland. If you want to go to university, you need to have done a language for your leaving cert for your A levels, and I hadn't done. So that was out. I couldn't do it. So yeah. Anyway, that's another story. But so I was always interested in history and politics. That was one of the nice things actually growing up with my dad, was he was always interested in history and politics, and I used to watch the news with him, like when everybody else was, watching something fun. I don't know. I was sat in the what we used to call the television room. Funny enough, watching the 9 o'clock news with my dad, or watching what they used to call Today Tonight, which is like the equivalent of Newsnight.
Yeah.
Or Questions and Answers, which is the equivalent of
Question time.
Yeah. So I was a proper nerd in that sense. I knew all the when I was 9 or 10 or 11, I knew all the presidents of Ireland and all the who had been the Taoiseach and who was in power in 1956 or whatever. Knew it all off the top of my head. So, and I'm still addicted to that. So yeah, that was one of the nice things about growing up. Myself and my dad had that shared interest, in history and in politics, and we would sort of talk about it and argue about it and all the rest of it. So that was, they were the nice times, yeah. So that's I guess my early years. Yeah, I'm not quite sure where we go from here, but
well, you're in university. I want to know all about that. But were you still drinking heavily at this point?
Yes, yeah, I was. Yeah, I'd sort of given it up when I was sort of not fully, but almost given it up when I was sort of 21, 22. Because at that stage I was drinking really heavily and smoking a lot of weed.
And what made you think to give it up, or where did that thought come from? That strength come from?
Well, I guess I had a massive blowout in the sense that I was living in a I'd moved out of home again, and I was living with some friends of mine, and I got myself into trouble. Basically, I was spending money, rent money on drinking and dope, basically, and wasn't paying rent and was pretending to pay rent, and then eventually I got found out, and that caused a massive blow up, obviously, with my friends, and I let people down. I felt really bad about it, but I was an absolute mess, and in fairness, we were all doing the same thing.
Yeah. So time wise, this is the early 2000s.
Yes. Yeah. Probably 2001, 2002.
Okay.
Yeah, 2001, I would say, yeah.
And how was things like alcoholism, drug use, mental health sort of viewed in the west of Ireland at that sort of time?
Well, mental health was not something that anybody talked about. It would have always been, there would have been sort of local, I'm doing air quotes here, characters, people who obviously in hindsight had mental health issues or whatever, had alcohol abuse issues. Drinking was a big part of the culture growing up, certainly. But that's not to say that everybody was, because there's obviously the sort of typical stereotype of Irish people, they like a drink, but in my experience they don't like a drink any more than English people or British people or whatever. But I guess because I was drinking a lot, I was obviously moving in the circles of people who were also drinking a lot. Do you know what I mean? Like I used to hang around town. Once I got to the age of sort of 14, 15, 16, I was working. I wasn't only working at home, but I was working on my uncle's farm, so I had some of my own money, and I was doing, working on the bog. I don't know if you've ever heard of the bog, footing turf, that kind of thing.
No.
No, it's like the equivalent of the moors over here. Only it's like peat. It's like peat.
Yeah, the peat bogs.
Yeah.
But
so people cut their own turf in the bogs, and young lads like me would go in and rear the turf for like our neighbours, and you get paid for it, and it was bloody hard work. But so I had a few quid, of my own money.
Yeah.
And that invariably was spent on drinking and going out. So basically, when I got to the age of 14 or 15, the understanding was that with my dad or my parents generally was that I'm just going to do my own thing here and sod you, basically.
Yeah.
Because like I was pretty pretty rebellious and pretty unruly, and obviously that was down to what was happening to a large extent. So yeah, I went out and drank a lot and played a lot of Gaelic football. So what they call the GAA, you might have heard of it, Gaelic Athletic Association.
If it's to do with sport, let's assume that I haven't heard of it.
Fair enough. That's fine.
I nearly killed someone last night with a dart.
Oh, good grief! Yeah. Well, that could be tricky. Yeah. Yeah, so I played a lot of Gaelic football. So Gaelic football
Yeah.
and so there's football and hurling. They're like the two main sports in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like soccer over here. Or
Yeah.
what people
In terms of popularity.
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I played a lot of that. I wasn't too bad at it. I enjoyed it, but I was drinking a lot and smoking. I was smoking cigarettes, and once I got to the age of 17 or 18, I wasn't as good as I was when I was 13 or 14 because I was drinking a lot and smoking a lot. And I guess then when I was I can't remember the first time I smoked hash. I can't remember, maybe 17 or 18, something like that. So there was, it was, I wouldn't say it was freely available, but it was a knocking about. It was there. Some of my friends had it. Most of my friends wouldn't have. But
What did it do for you?
It just numbed my brain, basically. It numbed, I think I drank and I smoked to forget, to be in another place. Where I was sort of half adult and sort of, didn't have to think about things.
So what happened when you started uni and you were giving up or trying to give up?
I was trying to give up.
What happened in terms of forgetting, blocking out? If you were giving up the drink, were those thoughts coming back in?
Yeah, they would. Yeah. But I just tried to sort of, just muddle through. I guess just put the head down and a good dose of
distraction.
What people what you might understand as stubbornness, what we call thickness, where I'm from. You just carry on, So yeah, I was still a bit messy, in the early years of university. But then I met Sinead, my now wife, and that pretty much changed my life. She was a big stabilizing influence in my life.
How did you meet?
In a nightclub.
Well, that's what I was guessing. Actually, that's what I was guessing. So were you tanked up? Were you both tanked up? Were you? What was the situation? What was it like at that time?
Sinead was considerably more sober than I was. I was always pretty useless when it came to the opposite sex. I have to say.
Me too. So I gave them up.
Yeah. So yeah, I was always, I think, just incredibly shy, and I was always sort of bravado and all the rest of it. And but I think deep down I was just a bit shy and insecure, and there was always girls that I fancied and all the rest of it. But I never had very many. I think I had one steady girlfriend when I was 16, 17, and I was mad about her, and I messed that up, of course, and because I was a total, lunatic. Too busy drinking and all the rest of it. But anyway, yeah. So I met Sinead, and we met in a nightclub, and I had a few beers in me, and I was probably half stoned as well, to be honest. And I wouldn't have dared went up and. Basically, what happened was she was standing like by a wall in the nightclub where there was like a ledge where I'd left my pint. Yeah. Because I was out, throwing a few shapes on the dance floor with some of my mates. So I decided to go back and get my beer, and there she was standing there, and I was like, good grief, this is one seriously good-looking woman. What do I do? And I plucked up the courage to speak to her. I think my pint might have been sort of half behind her. So I had to sort of like walk up right beside her to get to my pint, the all important pint, and so I just spoke to her, and we got talking, and then a few other things happened, and the rest is history, as they say.
A few other things happened. That's gorgeous that you kind of saw. Would you say it was almost love at first sight then, or one of those, I don't know, light bulb moments or lightning strike?
Yeah, I remember sobering up very quickly. I was sort of half, frazzled, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember sobering up very quickly once I got talking to Sinead, and I was waffling on about, you know, university and history and how much, you know, how great it was and how I loved history and politics and all this, and she was entertaining me, of course, and bless her. And I ended up walking her home, and she actually lived quite close to where I was living. But I walked her home, and that was it. And we agreed to meet. I think a couple of days later for coffee or something. And I got her number. I had I had phone at that stage, and I texted her on the day I was supposed to text her. I think it was like a Sunday, and she changed her mind, and I was absolutely devastated. And I was like, oh man, this is like, you know, this, you know, I'm going to miss this opportunity, you know, again, kind of thing, you know. And I just sort of, I sat there looking at the text message, and I was thinking, what do I do? What do I say? And then I just sort of settled upon, well, you know, that's a pity, but, you know, if you change your mind, let me know. So apparently that impressed her.
Oh, okay, that was perfect.
You know, and you know, rather than sort of going, oh right, yeah, see you later, kind of thing, or whatever.
Oh, please, please. Which would have been my course of action.
Yeah. So I sort of went for the sort of middle course, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
But,
the cool guy.
Yeah. So, yeah, but it's a funny story. I'll try and tell it very quickly. It turned out that Sinead's cousin Deirdre was in university with me, but we didn't know it.
Yeah.
And one day, Deirdre and Sinead got chatting, like maybe a week after, and Deirdre was saying to Sinead, how are you getting on? Are we out lately? Oh, blah, 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 blah. And she was like, oh yeah, I met this lad from Roscommon, and he was lovely, but I couldn't really be bothered with, you know, a relationship with this. I think she'd recently broken up with a guy, and she couldn't be bothered sort of getting to the next, you know, moving on to the next stage or meeting up again, and, you know, sort of opening up the possibility of, you know, sort of going out with somebody again. And Deirdre's like, oh, he's from Roscommon, is he? And she's like, yeah. What's his name? And she was like, Aiden. She's like, Aiden? And she was like, yeah. And he's from Roscommon? And she was like, yeah. And is he a farmer by any chance? And she was like, I think he grew up on a farm. And then she started describing what I looked like and all the rest of it. And then they discovered that it was me. And long story short, they were having a party in Sinead's house, Sinead and Deirdre and some of my mates actually from university, and they all discovered that Sinead had been with Aiden. And next thing I got a text from one of my mates saying, oh, why don't you come to this party, we're all at this party. And I was like, oh yeah, fair enough, well, where is it? And he gave me the address, and I looked at the address and I went, oh god, that looks familiar. And I walked over to the house and I was like, this is Sinead's house? This is weird. And Gary, one of my mates, opened the door and he had this massive smile on his face. All right, Aiden, how are you getting on? Oh yeah, grand, yeah. And I just walked in, and Sinead was in the kitchen, and I just went, oh hello, and just walked into the where the party was and sat down, trying to play it cool, you know. And we got chatting, and everybody sort of dispersed and went their separate ways, and ended up chatting, and we went from there.
Oh wow! So this was still in Galway.
Yes, yeah.
So when did you move to? Was it Belfast?
We moved to Belfast so I did a BA degree in history and philosophy, and then I did an MA in history in Galway.
Yeah.
And at that stage, I'd sort of, at some point, I think when I was doing the MA, I moved in with Sinead, and then we decided when I finished the MA that I was going to do a PhD, and Sinead, who's a dentist, she was like a fully qualified dentist, but then she was thinking about specialising as a paediatric dentist.
Yeah.
And the best place for both of us to do the things that we wanted to do was in Belfast.
Okay.
So we moved to Belfast in 2008, early 2008. Yeah. So and then we got married in 2009.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And And when did you decide to start a family? Was it around that time?
Yeah.
How old would you have been then? So, coming up to 30?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'd been going out, we started going out in sort of 2005, and so we were going out for 2 years, left Galway, moved to Belfast. Hold on, let me see. I'm trying to think, because we were engaged for 2 years, I think. So we must have got engaged, gosh, in 2007, is that right? Yeah, so we've been together for 2 years, got engaged, and then we were engaged 2 years, and then got married.
Don't let Sinead listen to this episode of the podcast.
I know, yeah.
He did know Sinead. He was pretending not to.
I do try my best.
Typical man.
Oh dear, yeah, I know, yeah.
So where was your mental health at this point then?
Well, to be honest, I was still, I've only really admitted to myself in the last couple of years, in the last 2 or 3 years, that I have an issue with my mental health, that I do get depressed, and that I do get anxious, and I do get, I have regular bouts of depression.
Yeah.
So back then, to be honest, Richard, I don't know, it's like, looking back on it, I think I always sort of knew there was something wrong with me, but like, I knew that drinking was bad for me.
Yeah.
It used to send me to a very bad place. Like, sometimes I would I never had a high tolerance for alcohol, and sometimes I would just get ridiculously drunk and, really get myself into very daft, embarrassing situations, and doing things, that I completely, wouldn't be able to remember the next day, total blackouts, that kind of stuff. So, like,
would you be embarrassed?
Oh, dreadfully so, yeah.
Okay.
But like, I would never admit it. It was all internal.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't mean that in a shameful way. I meant that in a... I don't know. I suppose I felt sorry because asking the question, I kind of thought you would say yes. And I do often feel sorry for people when they... Yeah, they feel embarrassed and shame at the behaviour.
I don't know. It's funny, isn't it? I don't know. Like, that's just the way I felt about it. But I was always just sort of, act tough and get on with it, and so that's just the way it is, and everybody else is doing the kind of thing, But of course, not everybody else is doing it. But so I guess from a fairly, I guess by the time I was 16, 17, 18, I knew the way I was carrying on wasn't doing me any good. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I just ploughed on anyway, because, that's what a lot of my friends are doing, similar things, drinking a similar amount, or, but they were able to handle it better or whatever, or they were able to sort of compartmentalise their lives a bit better. And it was, as I say, it was pretty normal for people to drink quite a lot. It wasn't, but I just couldn't handle it. Do you know what I mean? I just was never, as I say, I didn't have a very high tolerance, and then I would drink to excess, I would go beyond what was normal.
And were you an emotional drunk, an angry drunk, just like you say, doing stupid things drunk?
I would fall asleep sometimes, in random places. I would, sometimes I could be very cranky and get angry and be difficult, and get into the odd fight here and there. So I was generally a bit of a mess, basically. to sort of to give you the general gist. So I guess by the time I was, I'd met Sinead, I was still drinking, but like I would say on and off, I think I need to stop drinking, and Sinead would say, oh well, you're not too bad, and don't worry about it, and like I definitely reined it in when I met Sinead, because I thought, I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to, I don't want to lose her, basically, because if I carried on drinking the way I normally would have done, I would have definitely messed it up at some point. She would have got fed up, quite naturally. So I definitely reined it in, but then, there would be every now and then I go on the lash, or I go on the session, with some of my mates, and there'd be heavy drinking involved. I like Sinead enjoyed going out as well and having a drink and all the rest of it, but she just, she could regulate herself and do it like most people could,
So you had all of this going on in your head. You had all of these fights, all of these demons, and yet you were a really hard worker and pushed yourself towards excellence and difficult tasks. Like, you know, I'm going to study this, I'm going to study that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to start working for the Labour Party. You know, you had all of these things going on whilst you had all of the other things going on at the same time.
Yeah, well, I guess I was always very driven. I don't know why that is. Like, you know, I guess we, you know, my siblings and I, we were all, you know, pretty driven, I guess, and hardworking and all the rest of it. And I guess I felt when I went to university.
Do you really not know where that comes from, that drive? Could you link it in with something possibly?
Well, I guess, you know, partly it's to do with our upbringing, obviously, and how the fact that we had to work from a very young age and all that, and had a lot of responsibility from a young age, but also the sort of drive to get out and to get to see beyond that and to experience the world and to... I guess the other thing that I didn't really say was, you know, I was exposed to the outside world because of my siblings and because they had all immigrated to England, and they would come home and they would bring their friends with them, and you know, I went to London when I was 10 for my brother's wedding, and it was absolute bombshell, you know, in the sense that it was like, you know, walking around Westminster you know, and seeing all these, you know, to put it very crudely, I've written about this as well actually, and being Irish in Britain, but seeing all these black and brown people, it was like, oh my God, you know. But like in a good, because, you know, obviously in a positive way. You know,
yeah, because you hadn't seen diversity from where you were from, is that?
Not at all,
no. No, I was kind of similar when I moved down to London, from the northwest. You know, I did grow up in a place that was, we had like a couple of people in the school that weren't white British, just a couple, and it was quite a large school, and that was kind of the diversity in our town. So then moving down to London, I absolutely loved it. And when I moved away from London again, 13 years later, I really missed the diversity and the difference everywhere. Like now I live in this little village and there is one family, non-white family, and that's about it. And I remember going over to Liverpool to, I think it was Croxteth or Toxteth, one of the two. And I said to my mum back a few years ago, Mum, I found the place that I want to live. I told her, and she said, oh, it's really rough there. I said, yeah, but it's full of diversity, and it's just like Finsbury Park. So that was me. I absolutely loved the diversity and the difference because I got bored.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like it's like my, you know, it's the same. My mind was blown, and I loved it. You know, it was just amazing to see all these different people, and you know, everything just seems so cool, you know, when you're that age and you see all these, you know, good looking sort of young people, you know, going around and like a lot of, you know, my siblings were in their sort of late teens and early 20s, and they had lots of friends, and my brother had a couple of Dutch friends, and they were actually they were a gay couple.
Okay.
And lovely guys, and it was so funny, like, cause
so you got to see all of life.
Yeah. But it was just so funny because, you know, my mum and dad would have, like, that was just so alien to them. But, you know, in fairness to them, fair play to them, you know, they just, you know, we went over for about a week for my brother's wedding, and like my dad would be sitting there chatting to my brother's gay friends, like getting on like a house on fire. Like.
So just taking it in the stride.
Well, I think he knew that, kind of half knew that they were gay, but it just, you know, it wasn't like mentioned or anything or discussed. Do you know what I mean? But like, you know, they were lovely people, and it was an amazing experience, and it really, you know, I guess what I'm trying to, in a roundabout way, I'm trying to say is I knew there was a world outside of Elphin and the farm, and you know, I knew that I could aspire to something else, I guess.
So did you always know that you'd move to England?
I guess I always felt that it was a very high probability that I would end up.
Or just the UK in general?
Yeah.
Taken in Northern Ireland? Or
I think when I was in my late teens and early 20s, that thought had actually left my head, and I thought I'm just going to end up being around at home. Because at that stage, late 90s, early 90s, so sort of Ireland was doing well, you know, Celtic Tiger, there was, you know, lots of jobs around, There was way more opportunities than there were in the 70s and 80s.
Was it more? Was there a sense that it was more where you were? Was there a sense that it was more settled in terms of the Good Friday Agreement and stuff like that?
Yes, yeah. I guess so. Yeah, Ireland felt a bit more at ease with itself. Obviously, there'd be lots of people who would dispute that. But,
I don't know if you can hear that dog barking, but there's a neighbour outside just waving to my neighbour's window, and their dog is going mad. All I can hear is loud barking. So I apologise, dear listener, and I apologise, Aiden, but
no worries,
that's what you're getting for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, you might be exposed to Conal and Maria at some point, but we'll see. Yeah. So, yeah, but I guess we ended up. Yeah, so as I say, in my sort of late teens, early 20s, I guess I sort of changed my mind about, I'm definitely going to end up in England or the UK because there's lots of jobs and opportunities here. But that's just the way it kind of worked out in the end, without actually trying or thinking, I definitely want to move to England. It's just the way it worked out. Because when we were in Belfast and I was doing my PhD and Sinead was training to be a specialist dentist, we had to move to Cardiff for her to finish her training.
Okay.
And then once...
This is going to sound like a really strange question to ask, but you mean Cardiff in Wales?
Yes, yeah.
Only because there could be a Cardiff in Ireland, I don't know. Oh, so you were close to me then? Close to me. I'm in North Wales.
All right.
In the same country.
The same country, yes, yeah. So we lived in Cardiff, but I guess trying to get back to where did the urge to push myself come from? I guess it was partly, my upbringing, and partly the desire to get out and to see the world. And I always knew I was interested in history and politics, and I guess I thought, I might be a teacher, or I might, do some, something education-wise at some point. And, in order to do that, I would probably need to move away from home, or almost certainly. So, but yeah, I've always been fairly driven. And, despite everything, despite all the sort of messiness and ups and downs in my life, and sort of mental health problems that I had that I wasn't necessarily aware of at the time, I was still sort of ploughing on and trying. And certainly, as I say, once I met Sinead, that was a big turning point in my life, major turning point.
Okay, so then what came next? Kids?
Yeah, so we got married in 2009, and Maria was born in 2011. Well, actually, we had a miscarriage in 2010.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that was sad. It's weird. It's weird, very weird.
Yeah, and not enough support, I don't think. Still.
Yeah, it was very. You just went in, and she had to have the. Without going into too much detail, I don't know what they call it. Some procedure, anyway. I remember when we went in for the ultrasound, and it was like you could just tell there was something wrong. They were sort of looking at us, and it was like, I can't remember how many weeks it was. Maybe I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 weeks or something like that, and you could just tell, within 30 seconds, a minute, that there was something wrong. And basically nothing had happened, basically. So she, we had to go and have Sinead had to have the procedure, and that was very, you just went in and had the procedure, and then you were home again, and it was like, well, that's it. It's like, it was very strange. Not pleasant at all, but obviously worse for Sinead. But then we got pregnant again fairly quickly, and Maria was born, thankfully, in 2011, when we were still in, hold on, no, we were in Cardiff at that point. So we'd been in Cardiff, we moved to Cardiff in, I'm going to say, it was 2010. It was August, September 2010, and Maria was born the following August. No, following July.
I said at the start that you can point the listener to a place where they can read about this in more detail. I feel like you should go there as well and read about it in more in more detail.
I know. Well, it's sort of the absent-minded typical man, as you say.
Yeah, you're only a few years older than me, and that I know what that's like. It's getting there already.
Yeah, trying to remember all the important details.
So how did fatherhood affect your mental health? Did it affect it?
I think it did in hindsight, yeah. It was good for me in the sense that it gave me a positive focus in my life and something to feel positive about, you know. It was great. But it also, I guess, it made me anxious in the sense that, how am I going to be able to do this? Because, I can barely look after myself, kind of thing, I was still sort of struggling, Maria was born, as I said, July 2011, and I just finished the PhD, and I didn't have a job, and Sinead was still doing her training, and was on, which was on fairly good money, but not a considerable amount when you've got a family, let's say. So she needed to go back to work because she was eminently more employable than I was. PhD in history, So Sinead went back to work after 3 months, and I was at home with Maria. So it was a bit of a shock to the system, but I managed. I think I did a pretty good job. I'm pretty happy with how I coped with it, I think, overall. But it was a great experience. It was brilliant. It was a real eye-opener, having to look after a small little person.
Absolutely.
Mostly, during the day, on her own, going for walks in the park and making all the meals and all that kind of stuff, and just generally hanging out. So
sounds lovely, actually.
It was lovely. Yeah, I did. It was that was like for about 8 months solid, I think. It was just me and Maria at home, and then I started working part-time.
Were you consciously aware that you wanted to be a completely different father than your own father?
Oh gosh, yeah. That's always been very much the forefront of my mind, that if I ever did have kids, and I think I always knew I wanted to have kids. I say always, but sort of from sort of early adult life, I guess, maybe.
No, I get that, because I was always the same. I just haven't had the opportunity.
Right, okay. Well, maybe one day.
Maybe, but I am 40 now. I'm getting old.
You're never too old. You're never too old. We've got friends of ours who have adopted, or whatever, or surrogate, or it's
adoption might be on the cards maybe next year, but
I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah.
But it's great. You'll enjoy it if you're lucky enough to get to that place. Definitely wanted to be different father. Yes, definitely. But as I say, so we were living in Cardiff. I was at home full time with Maria. I'd finished the PhD. I was at home full time with Maria for maybe best part of 6 months at least, and then I got some part-time work teaching in Cardiff University in the Centre for Lifelong Learning, and I picked up a bit of part-time work in Swansea University as well. Teaching, so tutorials. So I was working about probably 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and then I was at home, Maria, the other days, and she would have been, in nursery. There was a nursery, luckily, in the hospital, in the Heath Hospital, the University Hospital in Cardiff. I don't know if you know it.
No. I've never actually been to Cardiff.
Oh, have you not?
No, I've not. I've been told by so many people that I should have. I think I've been through it on a train. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
On my way to West Wales.
Bloody hell.
I know.
Yeah, it's a lovely place, Cardiff. We loved it. We met some nice friends there, and it was a lovely place to live, and people were friendly, and we enjoyed it there. As I say, I was at home with Maria, working part-time. Sinead was working full-time, and we were renting, and we were getting by, we didn't have that much money, we were sort of muddling away.
Yeah.
And then Sinead finished her training in, now let me get this right. She finished her training in 2012. I think sort of summertime 2012.
Do you want me to have a look for you?
That's all right. No.
I'm joking.
And we were both applying for jobs at the same time. I was applying for academic jobs, history, teaching, lecturing, research jobs, and Sinead was applying for specialist dentistry jobs. And of course, she got there first because academia is notoriously competitive. And I remember I got an interview actually for a job in Oxford, for a research fellowship in Oxford. And
wow!
It's one of those. Yeah, it's one of those.
Skip Trinity.
Yeah. It's one of those sliding door moments, where I went to Oxford, Hertford College in Oxford, in the summer of 2012, for an interview for a fellowship, and I didn't get it, and I was like, oh man, that's it, isn't it? I thought to myself, that's the boat sort of gone, kind of thing. And then Sinead got a job in Bradford as a specialist dentist.
Wow.
So
okay.
Yeah. So we moved up to Bradford in November 2012. Yeah.
And what a magical year for the country, eh? 2012.
Yes, yeah,
Olympics.
The Olympics, yeah.
The move to Bradford.
yeah. Well, do you know what? It's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of people talk about that as a really positive time, and it was really, it was a positive time, and we were positive about living in Britain, and I had a largely very fairly positive view of Britain and British people, and diversity and all that, and
what was it like then for an Irish person? I mean, I was living in London at the time, and I had a boss who was Irish up until 2010 anyway, and she had moved over in, I think, the 70s, and she was telling me about the signs: no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. And just to think that was a couple of years before I was born, or maybe even after I was born in the 80s, probably was, is crazy to think.
It is, yeah. Like, I remember my older siblings, they would have lived in London in the 80s, and certainly they would have said that, obviously at that stage you still had the conflict in Northern Ireland going on at the time, and it sort of moved over to Britain as well, and there was bombs going off in London and Birmingham and all the rest of it, and so they would have said that you had to sort of not that they were singled out or anything, or constantly sort of abused or anything, but there were certain sort of situations and contexts where you had to sort of keep your head down, as it were, or
so similar to how a Muslim person might feel today. Some person connected to Islam has blown themselves up on the other side of the world, therefore I am to blame.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. They would have said that, like, around the time that there would have been, if there was a bomb in London or whatever, that you would have, there would have been the odd sort of dig or remark or, Paddy this or whatever, and so it was, it was difficult for them in that sense. Not only were they young and from a completely different part of the world, but they had to sort of deal with that as well.
Wow.
But
that's bravery.
Yeah.
We've just got. I say we've just got. There's a Ukrainian refugee our friends have taken in, and he's that sounds horrible. He's been here every day. I was going to say he's on a timeshare because he kind of is. We're kind of making sure that he feels welcome and that he's got a bed here as well. And I can't get my mind around the bravery and the things that he must have seen. And in a similar way, things that you've just spoken about, then just moving as a young person to a different country where you're going to get a slightly hostile or sometimes a severely hostile environment is so brave. And
it is, yeah.
Like, almost, I can't comprehend that, because I suppose I've had it lucky. Yes, I'm gay, but I'm a white male, English born, living in England, moving to London. I've got it, sort of thing. I can hide my sexuality if I want to, but it's harder to hide accents, colour of your skin, things like that. So I'm always in awe of people that do things like that. I'll stop rambling now.
You're right. It is very difficult. Yeah. But like as I say, you have to balance the difficulties against, as I say, I think my siblings also had lots of very positive experiences of living in London, and they had some really great times and met lots of really good friends, and most of them have actually settled down and remained living in England, various parts of England. But so
2012, you're in Bradford.
We're in Bradford. We move up to Bradford, and Connell is born in August 2014. And at that stage, Sinead is working full time again for about the first. I think it was like 8 months when we moved up to Bradford again. I was at home full time with Maria, and then again I got part-time work in Leeds Beckett University. So it used to be Leeds Metropolitan, sort of used to be the Polytechnic. Then it became Leeds Metropolitan University, and now it's Leeds Beckett University. And got on, was getting on really well there. I was working part-time, same thing again, working 2-3 days a week, spend the rest of the time at home with Maria. Connell was born then in 2014. In the meantime, I'd sort of gotten involved in politics as well.
I was just going to say then, let's move on. Let's move on to the Labour Party.
The Labour Party.
That sounded just like Andy Burnham, that did actually.
I've got my cagoule on, I actually joined the Labour Party in 2010 when we moved to Cardiff. It was just after the Labour had lost the general election under Gordon Brown.
Yeah.
And the coalition government, and I thought, sod this, I'm not having this. David Cameron and Nick Clegg chumming up in the Rose Garden or whatever it was, and I thought, could you get two more sort of privileged, identical politicians in one small space if you tried? Answer no.
I was immature politically there, and I actually voted for Nick Clegg.
Did you? Oh no, no judgment here.
Oh no, you can judge all you want because I voted for him because I found him attractive. So judge away.
Well, he's not a bad looking chap. Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm being daft. There was a lot to like about. Nick Clegg was okay. In the sense that he was fairly middle of the road, fairly moderate kind of politician.
No, listen, you don't have to do that to me. It's fine. I'm now a Labour member.
All right. Okay. Good lad.
I've grown up.
So as I say, I joined the party and I got involved in Cardiff actually. First of all, just going to local party meetings, which are very boring, and don't ever subject yourself to that if you haven't.
I was going to go to my first one actually.
Don't bother.
Next. Well, no, the new person that's putting herself forward to be the MP contacted me to say that she'd listened to the podcast and she wanted to see if I'd be available to meet up and stuff, and would I come and vote. Basically, she was after my vote, which I think she'll get because she sounded really quite cool. I wanted my old MP, who had been our Labour MP for 27 years in this constituency, and he lost it in 2019 to one of the only people that's lost the whip in the Tory party. So that's how bad his crimes were.
Right. Okay.
Gosh. So I wanted him to run again, but he's not.
Who is the prospective MP, if you don't mind me asking?
Don't ask me that. It's Becky something. What's her name? That's really bad, isn't it? Shit.
Okay, no worries.
Becky something.
I spent. There was a by-election. This is sort of fast-forwarding a bit. When I started working for the Labour Party in 2017, there was a by-election in Allen and Deeside in early 2018. Where it was very sad actually. The MP, I don't know if you remember, his name was Sargent?
Becky Gittins, that's the name of the girl.
Oh, right.
Yeah, sorry, I
don't recognize. But anyway, I worked for a while in Allen and Deeside on a by-election campaign.
Okay.
So, joined the Labour Party, got involved in Cardiff, carried that on and sort of ramped it up when we moved to Saltaire, just outside Bradford. We found a place to live in Saltaire, just outside Bradford, and got more and more involved, and then I ended up being a local council candidate in 2014 for the local elections. Stood as a candidate in the ward that I lived in, which is called Shipley Ward, and did that. Was going to do it then again the following year, stand again as a candidate because I didn't win. But then decided against because Conal was born at that stage, and was working part-time, and that was going well, and I just sort of thought, well, it's a bit too much, but stayed involved and helped out with the general election that year in 2015, and then I got a job with one of the Labour MEPs for Yorkshire and the Humber region.
Perfect.
A guy called Richard Corbett, who used to be an MEP for Liverpool, actually.
Okay.
Back in the late 90s, early noughties, I think. Yeah. So I'd gotten to know Richard. Richard lives in Shipley. So I gotten to know him through the local party, and I'd sort of, at that stage, I sort of was getting a bit sick of working part-time in university. I was working part-time, hourly paid work. Didn't seem to be any prospect of getting a, even a fixed-term contract, never mind a permanent one. So I was putting sort of feelers out, if you like, for jobs in politics as well, and gave Richard my CV, and then all of a sudden the job came up in his office, and he took me on a trial basis for like a month or two, and then I was made sort of permanent then. But then of course Brexit happened. Yeah. Bloody Brexit.
Bloody Brexit, yeah. Bloody Brexit, that's still bloody Brexit, even more so.
Yeah, exactly. Still going on and on and on and on about it.
Yeah, but Boris Johnson got Brexit done, remember? So it's done.
He did, it's done. It's definitely done. Yeah.
Sodden off an island.
There's nothing wrong with it at all whatsoever.
To be fair, we're getting pounds and ounces back, so little crown symbols on pint glasses. So it was all worth it.
Is that happening tomorrow? I can't wait.
I don't know. Let's go and wait outside the supermarkets.
But anyway, so Brexit happened, and the Brexit campaign was pretty traumatic, actually, looking back on it now. And that didn't do much for mental health either.
No. Where was your drinking at this point?
I had scaled back a lot, but still every now and then, there'd be a blowout every now and then, or I'd go out and I'd drink too much and couldn't remember getting home, and that kind of stuff. And, up and down as well.
You couldn't go out and have, say, 2 drinks?
I was never very good at that, I'm afraid.
No. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know whether there's a sort of a slight addiction there. I wouldn't say I was ever, like, even in my worst, when I was sort of late teens, early 20s, I wouldn't say I was like a full-blown alcoholic.
No.
I wasn't that far away from it, I think, to be honest. I wasn't a million miles away from it. But certainly when I was at that stage, I got, settled down and got married and stuff, and sort of caught myself on to a large extent. But as I say, every now and then there'd be, heavy drinking, and obviously politics has a reputation for that kind of thing anyway, and it's true to an extent. I think again it's a broad generalisation, but it's certainly true to an extent. Still sort of dipping in and out of my sort of drinking problem, and in hindsight still sort of struggling with my mental health, but not really ever fully recognising it.
So when did you make that decision to acknowledge it and do something about it?
Well, fairly typically for me, I had to run against a wall, metaphorically speaking. That was a pretty solid pattern throughout my life, in the sense that it's, take it to the, it was the Eagles song, take it to the limit one more time. I had to push, I had to be something drastic to smack myself, punch myself, metaphorically punch myself in the face. And say,
hit rock bottom.
Yeah. So I started working for the Labour Party in 2017, and I thought, this is going to be a good job. It was a permanent job, salaried job, paid well. I thought, I can do this, cocky as ever. And it was too much for me. And, with 2 young children, I was working full time. all hours you could send. I was basically working as an organizer for the Labour Party regionally in Yorkshire, and it's a tough job. Anybody you speak to anybody, if you ever speak to anybody who does that kind of job, they'll tell you it's your life's not your own. But I knew that going into it. But I thought, oh yeah, no problem, I'll do it. But it just, and on top of it being normally a very busy and stressful job, there was the whole sort of atmosphere within the party at the time, with Jeremy Corbyn being the leader, and the sort of argy-bargy between people who supported Corbyn and people who didn't. And oh man, it wasn't. I didn't enjoy it at all. Did not enjoy it. And I wasn't. I know now that I'm not a very good multitasker, and it was the kind of job where you had to be a jack of all trades and do lots of different things and be good at it. And I couldn't cope with that. And then on top of that, all the aggro and all the grief and all the, being stuck between people and disciplinary matters and complaints and oh Jesus, it was not nice. I didn't enjoy it, and basically got to the stage where so I'd worked 2018, 19, general election comes up, end of 2019, the one that Boris Johnson won, and it was just awful, absolutely awful. And
the result or your mental health, or both?
Both, yeah, both. And again, it's like, oh well, brush yourself down, be grand. And I went home in February 2020 to see my mum and other family members, and I thought, that'll sort of get away, clear my head, and of course going home never did that for me.
No.
And came back to work, and I was at some run-of-the-mill meeting in Halifax with the local party, and was driving home, and it was like I was sort of, I don't know how you describe it. I've written about it, and the best way I can describe it is it just, everything started flashing in front of me, in front of my eyes, and I just started to panic basically. And I can't actually remember driving home. So Halifax is about a half an hour drive from here. From Saltaire, and I can't remember the drive home hardly, and I remember sort of getting out of the car and just sort of wandering into the house and just wandering around the house, walking around in circles, and checking my phone, sitting down, standing up, walking around, heartbeat going boom, 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 head boom, 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 and just had to sort of kneel over onto the couch, and I was just having a massive panic attack basically, and just had a bit of a breakdown basically, just hit the wall, So, there was something that happened in particular that day, but it was I just snapped basically.
That was the last straw. What?
Yeah.
Just that day.
Just that day, for whatever reason. I do not know.
So you sought out counselling, did you? Straight away, or
yeah? So
doctor first.
Went into massive slide depression. Just hiding out in the house, and like this is something again in hindsight, looking back in my life, this is something I would have done on a fairly regular basis when I'd never had a panic attack before, but when I was younger, when I was in my teens and my early 20s, I would have gone through phases where I would have been massively depressed after drinking heavily and not going into work and hiding out in the house or in the apartment or wherever I was living at the time, and not wanting to see the outside world. Now that kind of stopped when I met Sinead, and things sort of evened out a bit, but it still went on a little bit after that. But it came back with a vengeance, and so about a month of just darkness and depression and just not wanting to see people, not wanting to talk to anybody, trying to talk to Sinead about what was going on with me. Spoke to my boss, who, in fairness to me, he was very supportive, and they both advised me to get some counselling, and that's what I did, and took some time off work, and then towards the end of April 2020, 20, I decided I couldn't go back, because I just thought I really didn't enjoy that job. And that's not no reflection on the people I was working with, and in my immediate sort of team and that.
It just didn't fit you.
It didn't fit me, and I wasn't coping at all. And it would have been a really big mistake if I had to go back, I think. I'm absolutely certain of that. So that's when I really started to face up to what was actually going on, and what that I was somebody who suffered from anxiety and depression that was almost certainly connected to my experience as a child and growing up, and heavy drinking and abusing myself, and just generally being a bit of a up and down and just all over the shop. So it took a big thing to jolt me into reality, basically.
Well, it did. I mean, I know what you mean by that, but that big thing to me is your whole life.
Yeah. It
took your whole life to jolt you into it.
It did. I think it's hard. Like, I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and yours included, and people who've spoken.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. It's very, very helpful, and I've listened to Craig Oliver's one as well, and obviously Ian Dale has spoken to quite a few people as well about their mental health issues, and that's been a massive help for me, knowing that there's other people out there.
Okay, yeah. So knowing that you're not alone.
Yeah, it's been it's a big mental block for somebody like me, who comes from my background, very, from my perspective, and this is no reflection on anybody, but my, very socially conservative Catholic background, where mental health or your masculinity or femininity or sex or any of those things, they just weren't talked about. How are you feeling? Nobody ever said that. You didn't. That's not that people didn't care. That's just the way it was.
That's why I like to start every podcast with the simple question, "How are you?" But I don't mean it in a very throwaway remark. I mean it. How are you?
Yeah.
And because I do think it's important to say, "How are you feeling?" like you've just said, or to just check in with each other every now and again. But importantly, to check in with yourself. And it sounds like you never stopped kind of looking, or is this all retrospect that you're saying this, where you sort of checked in and realised that you were this or you were that, or you're feeling?
It's retrospective.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it is, because looking back now, I can see that having mental health problems, being depressed, wasn't something that I was prepared to. As I say, I think there's a nagging feeling in my head that I always knew that something wasn't right, but you can't admit it. You can't admit to weakness, and that kind of like, I wouldn't say I grew up in a very, in comparison to any other country, I don't want to sort of single out sort of Ireland and Irish people and that kind of thing as being sort of particularly hyper masculine sort of culture, but it was definitely very macho culture, and you were expected to be a hard man and to be tough, and especially if you grew up on a farm and you had to do lots of manual work and get on with it, and
well, I suppose time has a lot to do with that as well. A lot of heavy lifting, the time that you grew up in that country. The 80s, it was it was very masculine where I grew up, and I felt completely out of place. But so I suppose time, as well as location, as well as other things, as well as religion or culture and all of these different kinds of identities, they all play into it, don't they?
They do, yeah, they do. Like, it was a very sort of conservative Catholic culture when I grew up, and I was aware of that at the time. I rebelled against that. I stopped going to mass when I was probably 14, 15. Refused to go.
I bet that went down well.
Oh, like a bucket of sick, yeah.
Well, I was going to say a lead balloon, but a bucket of sick will do.
I'm just trying to give you the the sort of level of
full Irish experience.
Yeah. I could have said something else actually, but I won't. Anyway.
Say what you like on here. All I have to do is tick a box to say that there's dirty words in it.
Yeah. Bag of shite. There you go.
Bag of shite.
My dad was very, very keen on going to mass, bless him, and I was not. I just thought it was a complete and utter load of rubbish.
I won't keep you for much longer because you've gone really deep today, and I'm really thankful. But I've got just two questions. Do you think that your love for history and politics was linked to praise that you got from your dad?
No.
Not or in spite of your dad?
Yeah. Well, it was linked to the fact that we had a common interest. But my dad didn't do praise.
Okay. And my second question is, what were your feelings towards your dad now?
Mixed, but I'm okay with that now. As I say, I've written about it on. If people are familiar with the medium, I don't know if you are, Richard. It's like you can basically go on there and write a blog, and people can read it there. It's breakdown or breakthrough, fighting and facing up to anxiety and depression. So the fighting bit is what we've spent a lot of time talking about, and the facing up bit is what we're talking about now. So where was I going with that? Sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry, my fault.
No worries. Let me give me a second. I'll get back to it. So I was saying, God, I'm absolutely hopeless.
No, you're not. I am, because I can't remember.
You were asking me about history and my dad giving me praise and stuff. Oh yeah, how do I feel about my dad now? So yes, mixed feelings. So on the one hand, I feel that there were good times, and we did have common interests and shared interests, and we used to spend a lot of time together watching the news and talking about politics and all that kind of stuff, and that's where I got my interest in history and politics, and obviously that's a positive thing, because that's me, that's a big part of who I am. But that's massively contrasted with, and I think, as I've written in the blog, that he was often a violent bully, and was treated me pretty badly when I was a small boy, and I spent a lot of years, certainly up from 7 up to 10, 11, 12, where I was basically afraid of him. And living in fear is not a nice thing.
No, not at all.
And certainly living in fear of your dad is even less nice and very, very confusing. So mixed feelings, but it's it's the same. I can't same from my mum as well, to be honest, because she never. I don't think she ever raised a hand to me. I think she did a few times, but she certainly did with my sisters, and that I saw that, and that wasn't nice either. So mixed feelings there as well, I guess. So yeah, it's difficult, but I've faced up to it now, and I thought, well, that's the way it is, and that's okay, and there's no point in blaming myself or trying to explain it away, as you spoke about earlier, or trying to sort of to feel bad about it or guilty or whatever. That's what happened, and it's okay to admit that, and it's okay to recognize that has had an effect on me, and it's had a pretty detrimental effect in some ways on my mental health, and it makes me anxious. It makes me, if I get into difficult situations or stressful situations, it's sort of fight or flight, and that, I think, that comes from that's how conflict was dealt with in our house. It was hit first, ask questions later kind of thing, and it was like, that's a lot of the times I find it very difficult to deal with stressful situations as an adult, and I think that's I would say almost certainly linked to my experience as a child. So I've had to sort of face up to that, and all the drinking and all the abusing myself with drinking, drugs and stuff like that was me trying to escape the fact that I was a very unhappy and very unconfused young boy and young man.
And it's funny because it seems strange as a mental health professional to be saying this, but it can have its place, that distraction, but at some point you have to face up to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it'll destroy you in the end. And I've seen it. I've seen that happen to other people. Now I don't know why. When I say other people, I mean like people who have had problems with drinking and drugs and stuff like that, and for whatever reason, but it destroys them, or it can destroy them. And that's obviously not good. And I think for a good few years there, when I was 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, it could have gone very, very wrong for me, and I'm lucky that it didn't. So, and obviously meeting Sinead was a big thing for me. Turned my life around basically.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. So Sinead and the two kids. What did you say they were called? Maria and
Connell.
Okay, that was it.
Yeah. So Maria's nearly 11 now, and Connell is nearly 8, and they're great. They're lovely kids, and we're very happy, and I have a great life in a lot of ways, and I've gone back and when I left the job with the Labour Party, I decided what am I going to do next, and I thought, right, well, I'll go back and write that book that I never wrote, so basically convert my PhD into a book, PhD thesis. So I spent the last year and a half doing that, and it's great to have the comfort in the room to do that, and looking after the kids during the lockdown, and that all really brought everything back to reality for me. What's important.
That's gorgeous. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of, because I was just going to say me too, but there's a lot of people that have done that, and it's allowed people to see the importance that's at home and reassess their lives, and that's really nice. Where did you say that people can read about all of this then? So blog.
I've got a blog, a couple of blogs on Medium, which is it's just a website basically that allows you to go on and write your own blogs basically. So it's Medium. What is it? Hold on, let me check. Medium.com, but you can just search Aiden Enright Medium and I'll come up. And I've written a blog on my sort of experience of mental health, and I've also written a blog on being Irish in Britain, the Labour Party, Brexit and me, which people might be interested in.
Absolutely.
I've also written a couple of articles for Yorkshire Bylines as well, which is an online newspaper, so people can, again, if you just Google Aiden Enright Yorkshire Bylines, I've written a couple of things on Northern Ireland, and they published a short piece of my mental health piece in Yorkshire Bylines as well. We got pretty good feedback on it actually on Twitter and that. So yeah, if people want to read it, just Google Aiden Enright Yorkshire Bylines or Aiden Enright Media.
I think it is so inspirational, brave, and informative that you're able to do these things, share these experiences, and for me, be on this podcast today, and it's been an honour. Thanks so much for joining me. It's been it's been a pleasure. It seems wrong to say it's been a pleasure, but you know what I mean.
I do, yeah. No, it has been, and thank you. It's been, it's. I was a bit sort of betwixt and between as to whether I should do it or not. Like even when I was writing about it, I was thinking, should I publish this and expose myself to the world like this? And I thought,
it's so brave.
I've gained a lot from reading other people's work, like people like Alistair Campbell and John Crace, and
Alistair Campbell is a target for this podcast.
I'm sure.
I've heard that he said yes actually, and just to message him, but so he's in my sights.
Good. Well, so I think thanks a million for having me on and listening to me rambling on.
No, thank you. Honestly, thank you. And hopefully, I know people will get something from this. You'll help someone from doing this, and I applaud you for that. So once again, thank you, Aiden, and I wish you luck in the future.
Cheers. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.